In 2024, the Oxford Dictionary word of the year was brain rot, and if that is not telling of the times, then I don't know what is. And today I wanted to talk about how basically this thing we call brain rot is all about our attention and where we're choosing to put it, and how intentional we should be with attention can change the way we actually live our lives. And there are thinkers and spiritualist teachers, philosophers who have touched on this subject like hundreds of years ago. And it's kind of crazy that even back then they were thinking about this kind of thing. And now it's more relevant than ever with this idea of brain rot. And if you don't know what brain rot is, the symptoms typically are you watch everything on 2x speed, which I am definitely a victim of, and you might feel rested but unmotivated. You struggle to have deep conversations. You struggle to be invested in more slow, meaningful practices such as reading. You crave more and more content but never feel satiated or satisfied after watching the content and are searching for more constantly. And lastly, you forget things easily. And I go through phases of all of these things being difficult. And I am someone who does engage more with long form content such as Substack, YouTube. But obviously the world we live in right now is very fast paced and very results driven. And these are things that I as a person don't mesh or fully agree with. So yeah, it's been like a constant struggle, and I'm not here to try and shame anyone who struggles with this idea of brain rot, because I think it's just a sign of the times. And as I've said, it's actually been an issue since like hundreds of years ago, but now I think it's just gone to another level with this idea of social media, the internet, and everything being super efficient. And in particular, when I talk about these thinkers and spiritual teachers that I want to touch on today, I am actually thinking about Simone Weil and Florence Scovel Shinn. And Simone Weil was you might know her as I think it was the anorexic philosopher, because she starved herself in order to protest. And then there's also Florence Scovel Shinn, who is, I think she's well known in the kind of manifestation, spiritual teaching side of things, but I don't know if she's heard of in more philosophical terms or when it comes to attention. I don't think I've really heard her being mentioned before, but she is someone who I've currently been reading about, and every single sentence she writes, I'm like highlighting. My whole book is basically just purple with the highlighter at the moment. And at the core of this conversation, I think it's all about mindset, and where we choose to put our attention is where we choose to take our lives. It's the thing that impacts our life the most and the outcomes that are generated from it. And I found this Substack that I think sums up the feeling I have about where my attention is placed and how difficult I am finding it at the moment, and perhaps you are too. And the Substack is actually this person called Kylie, and I'll write everything in the description box below so you can check out these amazing pieces of writing by these Substack writers. And this Substack was called Unrot Your Brain, and they say, if you're anything like me, you miss thinking for the sake of thinking. You want the curiosity back, the attention span back, the ability to sit with a question, really sit with it, without reaching for a distraction every 10 seconds, to want to engage again, to feel mentally present, to reclaim the part of you that used to light up at complexity instead of shutting down. You want to feel sharp again, capable and awake. And these are definitely all the things that I feel like are lacking in me when I am struggling with this idea of my attention being drawn to too many things at once, too much stimulation, too much overwhelm, and a lack of intentionality. And this in particular, it made me think of how Simone Weil particularly likes to talk about and brings up this idea of the joy of learning. This idea that learning isn't about academic achievement or competition, but it is in fact about the act of learning itself. And she says that attention is a habit we need to adopt in order to not be controlled by other forces. And Vey describes these other forces as being the thing that has the ability to transform any being into a thing. So think about a person becoming a cog in a corporate machine. That's kind of what she means. Where we choose to direct our attention, and the act of directing our attention, is one of the most powerful things that we have control over, and not one we should take lightly and let other people decide where that attention goes. And I like to think of this kind of metaphor of a plant, and we set the pathway for this plant to live. So we create the outcome by the attention we choose to put onto growing this plant. So for example, if we choose to water the plant, we choose to nurture the plant, clip the plant when it needs it, feed the plant and put it in sunlight, we are choosing to put our attention into nurturing the plant and therefore choosing the outcome that the plant will survive and thrive and live. Whereas if we neglected this form of attention, there would be a different outcome, i.e. that the plant does not flourish, does not grow. And you can think of this in the same way as when you think of an idea like a seed planted into your mind. And if you choose to nurture and nourish this idea, then the idea will grow and become something, and a certain pathway will be formed for you, a certain outcome will be possible for you. These small things, if they consistently occur, can then create this kind of unique world that is filled with opportunities and pathways that, if you were not paying attention, would not be possible. And they believed that all possible forms of experience only have the ability to be accessed when we open our minds to the possibility of experiencing them. I have another Substack here that's super interesting, and he I think goes by the name The Etymology Nerd, which I love that name, but they write, and the essay is titled Algorithms Are Killing Coincidences, and I think this idea in itself is really fascinating. But they say, consider the importance of randomness in academia. I've occasionally come across weird, lesser-known papers that helped me craft more unique arguments than if I had just used more widely known sources. I only found these lesser-known papers through coincidence, stumbling across a book in a library that happened to connect my work. Creativity means weaving together random data points into a meaningful way. If everyone is getting the same data points though, it follows that we're going to lose some creativity. We'll have fewer new coincidences to notice, which means fewer eureka moments of spontaneous lateral thinking. Being open and receptive to receiving new ways of thinking, new ideas, and spotting new patterns is about paying attention. And they really, really believe this. When I said that, over around 100 years ago, actually I think she was around in the 1920s. But it's sad to think that 100 years ago, the same thing was being spoken about, and if not, it's worse now. And this even goes for the way that we teach our children to be educated and to learn. And by this, Vey was speaking about how in education, we tell our children to search for answers. We don't tell them to search for questions or to ask questions. And the problem with this is that simply seeking out answers, definitive answers, it basically doesn't exist. There are no definitive answers. There are only things you can expand upon. And having definitive answers limits the way we learn, because we are attaching ourselves to an answer and therefore filtering all new information through this specific answer we have, and any counter information that comes our way, we either shut it down or filter it through this specific way of thinking, which is limiting. And it stops the ability of being able to pay attention to new things and new ways of understanding and seeing things that you might not have seen before. And this also means accepting incomplete truths as answers. And you'll see this even in science. Every day, new things are being discovered, built upon, and there isn't one fixed answer. But when you're taught science in school, you are told this is the definitive answer, even though in the real world, that's not how it works. They believe that there are only perspectives and not definitive answers. And the problem with this is that people stop thinking once they have an answer. They stop learning and become personally attached to the answer, and therefore stagnate and block out any other noise. And this also cuts off the idea of any connection you might form, new pathways you might have. And connection could even be in the idea of connecting with other people on common grounds. If you say you're one type of person, then you automatically shut down a whole other group of people. And again, the etymology nerd had a little anecdote for this, and they were speaking about making friends with people in a pub based on finding out really niche little things that you have in common with someone that an algorithm could never have spotted. For example, on the surface, you might seem like two completely separate people, but really underneath, you're two people that have completely niche, random commonalities, such as, I think there's this thing called the birthday effect, where you find out you have the same birthday as someone else, and that can be your little thing that you connect the dots with. And I have another quote from the etymology nerd, and they say, fewer coincidences means fewer opportunities for human connection. If we are all in our separate echo chambers, not noticing our funny little similarities, it becomes easier for us to feel polarized. There's no mechanism for shared story making. Your attention dictates what experiences are even possible for you to have. And a different experience for you is available to have at all times. But it depends what frequency you are running on. And you can think of this like a radio station. It sends out a certain frequency and then matches it, and only certain things will be able to be received on this frequency. Which frequency you choose to be on and pay attention to will determine the outcomes and the experience you have. And you don't have to default to how you would typically be, and you don't have to remain attached to anything. In fact, continuously learning is much more enjoyable. And this is where Simone Weil is also talking about how the joy of learning is the actual act itself, not the definitive answers that are produced at the end. And certain experiences are actually only possible if you are actually open to receiving them. And again, this kind of goes back to that metaphor of the radio station frequency. And I saw this question once that really made me think, and it's something I think about every day, and it's the idea of, are you exploring, are you dreaming, and are you discovering? And I love this idea, and I feel like it keeps this childlike wonder alive that you had when you were a kid, and how extremely exciting the world seemed, and how it wasn't a limiting place. It was in fact limitless, and there was so much you knew you did not know, and that was okay. So on the Contemplation Station Substack, I love that name, Contemplation Station, they write, attention is more than just focus, it's how we meet our moments. It's the way we notice the warmth in someone's voice when they say our name, the way food tastes different when eaten barefoot in the backyard on a humid evening, the way song lyrics hit different when they mirror something we've lived through. The it's all going to be all rightness we feel when we hear the tinkling laughter of children as a long hot day comes to an end. So what you choose to absorb and where you choose to put your attention determines the life you live. And this idea is echoed through the works of Florence Scovel Shinn, who I mentioned earlier, the spiritual teacher and writer. And I believe she was born in 1871 or 1817. I think it's 1871. I will put the actual date up on the screen. But yeah, so again, actually over 100 years ago, these thoughts were being spoken about. And as I said, I'm sure they've gotten worse. So they wrote the book The Game of Life, and they were very much into the idea of affirmations and manifestation. And I think this does feed into this idea of attention and where we choose to place our attention. And she says, man has ever a silent listener by his side, his subconscious mind. And by this she means, so we have 3 different minds, and this is what Scoville Shin believed. She believed that we have the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. So the conscious mind is the human mind, is the mind that sees things as it is. It's the mind that knows logic, the mind that knows practicality, that knows thinking. And then this mind, whatever it sees, imprints itself onto our subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind is purely power, and it is directed by other things, but it is directed even by the smallest of details taken in by the conscious mind. And then my favorite idea is the superconscious mind, which is the godlike mind. And the godlike mind is the intuition-led mind, the mind that knows things with gut feeling, and it cannot always explain things in rational, logical ways. It's like if you've ever had a feeling and then it's become true, this is your superconscious mind. It's also the mind that knows what your greater calling is. It kind of really knows who you are, but it can be kind of buried down in you and only comes out at certain points, or only if you're really listening and paying attention to it. It's actually the mind that your conscious mind might call the too good to be true mind. So it basically is the idealist. So Scoville Shin believed that we should pay attention both to our intuitive minds and also to what we put and place our attention on, and to what we absorb, what we choose to feed ourselves with, what information we choose to feed ourselves with. And she says, the subconscious mind has no sense of humour, and people often joke themselves into unhappy experiences. And by this she means, if you've ever had I think a lot of people have this kind of self-depreciating humour that they use to make themselves feel better about something that they feel bad about. But actually this sort of type of humour feeds back to itself and keeps you stagnated. So if it's that you think you're lazy, or you think you're unmotivated, or unattractive, you make these humorous jokes about yourself, but you're actually affirming that to yourself and keeping yourself in this loop of I am this way and I'm unfixable. And also when I say fixable, I'm not saying one needs to be fixed, but more that we keep ourselves in these kind of negative ways of thinking by reaffirming to ourselves that we are these things. And she is saying that with the conscious mind doing this, thinking it is a fact, our subconscious mind automatically is imprinted upon, and then we therefore live out our lives with these negative ways of thinking. And it keeps us stagnated and in these ways of thinking. And with all of this being said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that realistically, we aren't going to be completely analog in this day and age. And I'm not saying that we should totally forget about the internet, our phones, social media, because I think that it can actually be a great tool if used intentionally and purposefully. For example, to even write this essay and speak here, I had to use Substack, I had to use the internet, I used YouTube to get this out there. So I'm not saying we should completely go analog, and I think there is a time and a place for everything. I think it's just that we need to be more intentional and less doom scrolly. And for me, this does actually mean getting rid of social media, because I think I kind of end up just scrolling through reels, or TikToks is just scrolling through things and binging on your emotions and just letting your attention be fed by someone else, someone by an algorithm, there is no intentionality there. It's just mindless. But I also think it's important to use real world things like real world experiences, books, conversations with people. These are all super important and have a slower pace to them and more intentionality. But again, using the digital world intentionally is also a great tool, and why not use it? And there was actually a Substack written about this, and I think it was called The Zeitgeist is Going Offline by Crystal Clear. And I've mentioned them a few times before. I love their Substack, so definitely check them out. Again, all will be in the description below. But they write, we need to be discussing this more from the right perspective and with a well-rounded approach, because phones are bad discourse won't get us far. But we are seeing an undeniable shift in the zeitgeist, and I think it's promising. I love using digital tools to make my life easier and better, however I can, but my guiding value in life is creating joy and happiness every day. So it's not surprising that I'm on an active quest to figure out how I can exist in both worlds simultaneously. So if you find yourself stuck in these ways of thinking, using up your attention, because it is a form of currency, then I would recommend finding small ways to help yourself. For example, going on a walk without using your phone, not even to take photos, but really just trying to be present with the walk and the present moment. And other ways you can sort of put your attention onto things that aren't digital are by reading books. You could perhaps find a new recipe, do cooking. I find cooking to be quite a mindful practice, quite meditative, and I feel very much locked into what I'm doing when I am cooking and putting my attention solely on how the food comes out and the creative process there. Also, you could look into exercising. Obviously, that's a very obvious one, and that's great for you for numerous reasons. And actually, I think there's a book by Murakami. I'm not the biggest fan of Murakami in his fictional writing. He seems very sexist, but he has a great book about running and writing and how the two work together for him to help him be a better writer, and to help him also keep his attention intentional. And there's a great book, I can't remember the name, so I'll put the title up here. I haven't finished it yet, but I recommend reading that. And this also leads me on to another point, which is just my favorite film, which I wanted to end this on, which is Perfect Days. And I highly recommend you watch it, because it's all about being present in the moment and really reclaiming back your attention and where you choose to put it. And it's basically about a toilet cleaner. He cleans the toilets of Tokyo, and he's like a middle-aged man, or maybe a little bit older, and he just puts his full effort into everything he does, whether it's cleaning the toilet, reading a book, or simply observing a tree. And there's a particular tree that he continuously takes photos of and observes and really pays respect and attention to. And there's this word in Japanese called actually I've written it down. It is called komorebi, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but it basically means the light that leaks through the trees. And I like that there's an actual word for paying attention to something that's such a minute detail that would otherwise go unnoticed. So highly recommend that film. Please check it out if you haven't already. I think it's on Mubi. Yeah, my favorite film. And I think I'm going to leave it here. If you have any other ways you think you can put your attention into something intentionally, then please write in the comments below how you do that, how you choose to use your attention. I'd love to hear different ways in being more intentional in this way. Please check out my video on keeping a journal, because I think that journals are also a super intentional way of placing our attention and noticing and recognizing patterns within ourselves. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you again next time.